Okay, so now on to stuff from Chapter 1, defining personality. We'll actually start off with a little pretest to see just kind of how savvy you are about personality. So, if you don't mind, get a little piece of scratch paper, something, pause it if you need to, and just jot down your answers. We'll have 10 little bitty questions here. Okay. So there's true or false, and you're not being graded on it. I just want to kind of, I want you to see what you know going in. Okay, true or false? People who are tense and anxious are less likely to laugh at something funny than are people who are relaxed. Okay, first instinct, true or false? Angry people who are allowed to let off steam, such as by hitting someone with a harmless foam bat, are less likely to act aggressively than are angry people not allowed to release tension. True or false? Whether or not a person responds to hypnotic suggestions depends largely on how good the hypnotist is. True or false? Okay. Extroverts, people who enjoy excitement and social gatherings, generally are more sensitive to external stimulation than are introverted people. A business person who is willing to take high financial risks in order to achieve a potentially large payoff probably has a high need to achieve. Okay, so there are those five. Got five. A type A person typically works harder than a type B person, regardless of how trivial or simple the task. Students who suffer from loneliness usually overcome this problem when they start attending a large university with a lot of people their age. A couple is most likely to have a happy relationship when the man is masculine and the woman is feminine. Children are less likely to imitate the aggression they see portrayed on television when the person who acts aggressively is the hero and the aggression is seen as justified. A person who fails repeatedly on a task and decides there's nothing he or she can do about it will respond by working harder on the next task he or she faces. Okay, so hopefully you jotted down your here. And the answers, they're all false. And we'll kind of revisit this throughout the course. Why these things are false, and there'll be things that we talk about in the reading and in the lecture videos. But if you're like me, you probably put true for at least a couple of them. Because a lot of these things seem like common sense. Well, yeah, that makes sense. That if you're angry, you let off some steam by hitting something, you feel better, and you're less likely then to be aggressive later. But some research has said maybe not so much. Okay? So what seems like it should be true isn't always supported by research, and that's what makes this stuff so interesting. Because if common sense were all just true and supported by research, it'd be like, what's the point of research? Yeah, we already knew that. The interesting stuff is when what we think we know, it's not quite that way, or at least it's not always that way. There are some important exceptions, right? And that's what this is really about. So let's go on to defining personality. So one definition would be that it's consistent behavior patterns and intrapersonal processes. Okay, so what do we mean by consistent? How is it consistent? Consistent across time? Yeah, probably so. If you're like this today, you may be like this tomorrow, 2 weeks from now. Because if your personality is one way today and you're a totally different personality, different pattern 2 weeks from now, then it's not personality, right? There's this assumption that personality is inherently somewhat stable. It's this pattern that's somewhat stable or consistent, right? Across time and also across situations. Because if you're just a different person in every different situation, you're just reacting to what's around you completely, well, then that's not really personality either. That's just product of situation, right? So it's something that's consistent across time, across situation, and then we have in the definition here, it's consistent, but it's two things. It's behavior patterns and intrapersonal processes. So behavior patterns, that's just what you typically do, right? So when someone cuts you off in traffic, what do you typically do? Right? And then intrapersonal processes, as opposed to interpersonal processes, are what you typically think or feel, right? So again, somebody cuts you off in traffic, not what do you do, but what do you think? What do you feel? Right? And those things, if they're the things about you that are consistent across time, across situation, comprise your personality. Now, it's a question among researchers, among academics who like to argue about questions, is whether or not personality exists, whether or not there really are consistent patterns. Right? Or is it a matter of we just like to see patterns so much that we're imposing order on the chaos, and there is no such thing as personality. There is no pattern that's individualized, that you aren't a certain way, that maybe you're just reacting to a situation. Right? So one way to think about this is think about people who cheat, violate the academic integrity policy. Why do they cheat? Make a list of reasons why they cheat. Why would somebody cheat? Okay, if you've thought of a couple things, most likely you could probably divide your list of reasons into two piles. One would probably be dispositional attributes on one side. Maybe people who are just kind of generally immoral, they're cheaters. Maybe it's somebody who has they have low self-esteem. They don't feel good enough that they can't do it on their own, right? And then you may also have in the other pile, you may have more situational variables. Well, right now they're under a lot of pressure to succeed. And then in that class they might cheat because they got crappy instruction, right? And I would hazard to guess that most people agree that behavior is determined by some combination of these two broad factors, right? Some believe there's only one factor at play, that it's just situational. There is no personality. And if it looks like your behavior is consistent, then that's just a reflection of how consistent your environmental inputs are. Sorry. That's there. So the next thing I want you to kind of think about is, what if personality didn't exist? What if there were no such thing as personality? What would that mean for us as a people, for you? Well, potentially it could be kind of cool, because if people weren't all unique and different, then they were just kind of reacting organisms responding to situations, then we could predict behavior with certainty if we knew the situation, right? So if we can predict behavior by knowing situations, that means that we can also control behavior by controlling situations. So if we want perfectly behaved children, all we have to do is provide this kind of perfect environment, right? If we want perfectly passive and submissive citizens, as in the state, all we have to do is create a certain environment, and we can pacify people, and we can have no war, right? So, what would it mean for you, though, if you said, "Oh, well, you don't have a personality. All you are is an organism that's eating, sleeping, breathing, and reacting." If you're angry, it's because somebody made you angry, not because anything particularly about you. I don't know. I prefer to think that maybe there's such thing as personality, and it seems to fit more with my worldview. But maybe we're different. But if you don't think there's personality, I'd be curious to see what you think after reading about the kind of 6 approaches that we'll talk about over the course of this semester. These are just different ways of thinking about how people are different from each other, right? The study of personality is frequently comes down to the study of individual differences. Why is this person this way and this other person is this other way? These people are different. They're individual. They're unique. There's something unique about you, and it's different than something about you, right? And the answers that you find when looking at the 6 approaches are different, largely because you're using different questions. Right? So we have the psychoanalytic approach, the trait approach, the biological approach, the humanistic, the behavioral, and the cognitive. And in this course, we'll break down psychoanalytic into kind of 2 camps, Freudian and Neo-Freudian, because there are some important differences there. But often they are subsumed under one psychoanalytic or psychodynamic heading. And really, another way to kind of think about this is that these things are just really different lenses for looking at the world and looking at people. Right? So from psychoanalytic point of view, you're thinking about these kind of unconscious motivations. So you're not aware of what's driving you, right? And a lot of influence from early childhood. A trait approach doesn't really look at all about why you are the way you are. All it is an approach that looks at describing how people are, and this idea that people can be described by some combination of traits, of personality traits, right, that are evenly distributed throughout a population. In the biological approach, which looks a lot at kind of why you are the way you are, and looking at kind of genetic influences in particular. A humanistic approach, which is largely a reaction to the psychoanalytic, psychodynamic approach, which with a big emphasis on freedom of choice and personal responsibility. So kind of getting away from this kind of deterministic model of, well, you've had these situations, these experiences early in life, and so you're going to be this way. A humanistic understanding of personality is you have the responsibility to determine how you're going to be. And the degree to which you take hold of that responsibility and live and take control of living your life, the happier and more fulfilled you'll be. A behavioral point of view, which looks really more at that the idea of maybe no personality, right? In terms of rewards and punishments driving what we do. So we don't do it because of who we are, we do it because of what's been happening in our environments. And then a cognitive approach, looking obviously at how our thought processes influence how we are. So how we think about ourselves, how we organize information, how we process information coming in, those types of things. And we'll get into all this obviously in much more detail as we go throughout the semester. Okay, so getting back to this. Because these approaches provide different lenses, different ways of looking at people, and so we're often looking at the same people. So we're looking at the same data, the same information, but looking at it differently. And because of that, we get different questions about people. Right? So some will focus more on why are you like this? Some will focus more on how are you different? Some will focus more on how are you alike? Right? And because you have different questions, you obviously are going to get different answers. So it's not necessarily the case that one approach is right and one approach is wrong. They're just coming at these kind of the same phenomenon at different angles. Sometimes not that different. And the last thing I kind of want to touch on is just kind of acknowledge the fact that everything we talk about in this course, and much of the research on personality is somewhat limited by the cultural context in which the research was conducted, in which we are embedded. Right? There's largely a Western bias in our knowledge base of personality. Right? Much of what we know about personality and what you're going to read about in the book are based on studies of people in Western cultures. Right? And it's possible that how people are is different in these kind of Western cultures than Eastern cultures. Right? And largely when we look at differences between Western and Eastern, there's lots of different ways of looking at these differences. But one of the big ways to look at it is individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. Right? So cultures where the focus is on individual rights and freedoms and growth. Right? And not that being part of a group isn't important, but it's I am part of a group rather than we are a group. right? In a collectivistic culture, it's less focus on I and more focus on we, on kind of a collective identity and harmony with each other. And because there are some differences that people have found, kind of cultural researchers, it seems likely that some of our theories and some research findings about personality, based on people in highly individualistic cultures, may not generalize to all peoples. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind about our knowledge isn't universal knowledge. Okay.